Some say he wined and dined with the devil, but I say he was the devil himself. Julio Santana was a contract killer, very good one at that. He never, and I mean never, missed his target. He was a walking and breathing death machine. But I'm not here to bore you by narrating all the victims he killed and how he killed them, because there's a more horrifying side to this story. Julio never wanted to be a killer. He had dreams of being a normal man, with a normal life and a normal family. Until one moment turned young Julio into a monster. One moment that made him see killing people as a good thing. One moment that started like this. Julio Santana was kneeling with one knee on the ground and one hand placed at the trigger of his rifle. It was August 6th, 1971, and 17-year-old Julio was minutes away from committing his first murder. He was scared to death, just like any normal person would be. He kept asking himself again and again if this man deserved to die. The answer was clear. He actually did. But Julio kept wondering, why was he the man to do the job? About a week before then, the man Julio was about to kill, Antonio Martins, was a 38-year-old fisherman who had just raped a 13-year-old girl in a nearby village. Antonio told the little girl he wanted to take her on a little trip to see the pink dolphins on the Tocantins River in Brazil. But as she got into his canoe for the journey, Antonio raped her mercilessly. Just thinking about it makes me angry, but my anger is not comparable to that of the girl's father. The moment he saw his daughter return home with blood dripping down her thighs, while she wept bitterly. To say he was an angry person doesn't really cut it. He was fuming with foam out his mouth and wanted nothing more at that moment than to put the pedophile rapist Antonio 6 feet underground. Sadly, he couldn't do the job. He needed an expert assassin who would get the job done without missing. And guess who he hired? Not Julio Santana. The girl's father actually hired Julio's uncle instead. Remember I said at the beginning that Julio wasn't always a killer? Well, he actually wasn't. He was just a young boy living in a small village inside the Amazon rainforest, with the dream of almost every youngster in that village back then, and that was to become a very good fisherman. Julio was that poor little kid who no one cared about after he found out his uncle, Cicero, who was a military policeman, was also an assassin. What a man, right? Enforce that law by day and then just break it at night. While we're still trying to wrap our heads around Cicero's line of work, this was the moment Julio got initiated into the cult of assassination. When the little girl's father contracted Cicero to get the job done, Cicero in turn gave the job to Julio. Hanging around a man like Cicero meant getting involved in frequent shooting practice almost all the time. So Cicero knew that Julio could get that job done for him. But wait a second. Why Julio? Cicero could have easily gotten that job done himself without a flinch. But old Cicero tricked Julio into doing it instead. He handed Julio his rifle, gave him his blessings, and told him, go kill that pedophile and break a leg while doing it. Well, maybe not the last part, but you get what I mean, right? Anyway, here we are. Back to where we started with Julio kneeling on one knee and the rifle in his hand. His uncle hadn't narrated what the man had done, so yeah, he deserved to die. But Julio didn't have the balls to take the shot. He took his spot in a stuffy and hot forest canopy for 3 hours, while he stared at his victim in his wooden boat. He was only 40 yards away and knew without a doubt that he wasn't gonna miss. He told himself, "It's now or never, Julio." And bam, he took the shot. This is where it got real, people. That shot obviously did more harm than good for Julio. First off, he couldn't get the sight of that man falling lifeless inside the wooden boat out of his head. Secondly, Julio was a staunch Catholic, and immediately he knew he had committed a grave sin against God. How could he right this wrong? What was he even thinking? He wasn't a killer. The only thing he ever killed were monkeys in the bush for food or forest rodents. Why? Julio was losing his mind, and it's quite understandable since it was his first kill. Hey, don't ask me how I know that, it's something we all know. What I also know is that you might never get to see us again if you don't scroll down, subscribe to our channel, and turn on those notifications so you don't miss any of our thrilling videos. Now, back to the story. Julio threw the dead body into the river and told himself that he would never, ever kill another man. Even though that's something he did 499 more times, in that very moment he hated it. But more than anything else, he hated himself. He ran straight to his uncle and poured out his frustration on him. His uncle managed to convince him that he was doing the Lord's work. After all, you can't really argue that the man deserved what he got. His uncle told him that God was going to forgive him if he said 20 Our Fathers and 10 Hail Marys. And that's got to be the worst uncle ever, believe me. But Julio believed him. Maybe because he was still very naive. Or maybe he just needed the comfort of someone telling him he hadn't just committed the worst crime ever. But one thing became clear. Julio's first kill led to another, and another, and another. Until the name Julio Santana became the name of death. Now, I wish I was the smart guy who coined that term, but I'm not. It was coined by another man, Cléster Calvesant, an award-winning Brazilian reporter and the man who we should thank for giving us an in-depth view of the life of Julio Santana. 13 years ago, this reporter, Cléster, was on a trip to make a report on modern-day slave labor in the Amazon. Obviously, Calvesant was trying to dig up anything and everything that would bolster his report. So he asked literally anybody for useful information. Then there was this particular federal officer that told Calvesant about ranchers in the area contracting assassins to get their dirty work done. Cléster was very interested in this story. I mean, who wouldn't be? So he asked the officer if he could help arrange a meetup with one of the hitmen. And voila! He arranged that meeting with the best hitman, our very own Julio Santana. But who was Calvesant kidding? Did he really expect one of the deadliest hitmen to just show up and say, "Hey, I'm Julio, hitman with like 500 kills, nice to meet you"? Of course not. Julio wasn't interested in being part of this report. The twist is Calvesant wasn't ready to give up. He spent 7 good years trying to get Julio to talk to him about his life. This was the case of a reporter who deserved the Employee of the Month award every month, and a hitman who wanted to bury the secrets of his life. And after a lot of convincing, Julio Santana finally decided to share his story. But believe me when I tell you the reporter, Calvesant, wasn't in the slightest inch prepared for what he was about to hear. And neither are you. The Brazilian government started a war with a group of communist insurgents in the Amazon, known as the Araguaia Guerrillas. The so-called guerrillas recruited farmers and fishermen to fight their war, but Julio's uncle sent them to the other side of the war to fight for the Brazilian government. Julio, for the first time in a while, knew he was doing the right thing. He did his tasks for the government with pure passion, and became part of a little group of soldiers that captured one of the guerrilla leaders, Jose Genuino. I personally find the story funny because, for his good work in capturing Genuino, Julio was rewarded with a bottle of Coca-Cola, something he saw as a luxury back then. For every person he killed, Julio wrote their names in a notebook to keep track of that number, and by the time the number rose to 492, Julio was just disgusted with himself and just stopped keeping the record. Among the names in the notebook was a 22-year-old schoolteacher, Maria Lucia Petit. Maria was a silent member of the guerrillas. But you bet Julio was able to uncover her secret membership, taking her life in the process. Another man that was highlighted in Julio's book was one he did in 1987. He was ordered to kill a woman on mere suspicion of her cheating on her husband. That's just crazy. But Julio finally stopped killing people back in 2006 when he turned 52. Apart from the fact that he was obviously getting old, Julio found out that his uncle was ripping him off of the payments for all the assassinations he did. Can you believe he only got paid around $70 per kill? Now, I'm not so good at maths, but I bet you if you multiply that number by the total number of people he killed, he probably didn't even earn up to the minimum salary in Brazil. He earned pennies for his years of service, while his uncle was probably a millionaire. The other reason he had to stop was that his wife gave him an ultimatum to either choose between killing people or his family. He chose his family and never told his story to his kids or anyone else apart from the persistent reporter. Now, he lives a secluded life somewhere in Brazil, and thankfully the days of killing are over for Julio Santana. But for us, this ain't over. Because that video shown on your screen is the best one I've ever made. So click on it, and I'll see you there.